Are you struggling with making multiple API calls in your application? It can be a real headache, especially when you want to wait for all of them to complete before moving on. If that sounds like you, stick around because today we are diving into how to use AsyncRestTemplate to handle multiple API invocations efficiently. I totally get it. Making multiple API calls can feel overwhelming, especially when you have to manage different parameters and ensure that all responses are handled correctly. You're not alone in this. Many developers face similar challenges. Let's look at a specific scenario. One user recently asked, how can I implement AsyncRestTemplate to make multiple API calls and wait for all of them to complete? They were using REST-template but wanted a more efficient solution. Sound familiar? Let's explore how we can tackle this together. So what's the issue here? When you make multiple API calls synchronously, your main thread gets blocked until each call completes. This can lead to performance bottlenecks, especially if the API responses take time. Using AsyncRestTemplate allows you to make these calls asynchronously, freeing up your main thread while waiting for the responses. And don't go anywhere. At the end of this video, I'll share a bonus tip that will help you optimize your API calls even further. To implement AsyncRestTemplate, the user should first create an instance of AsyncRestTemplate. This allows for non-blocking API calls, which is essential for making multiple requests simultaneously. Next, the user needs to prepare a list of futures to hold the responses from each API call. This will help in managing the results once all calls are completed. Now the user should loop through the list of student IDs and make asynchronous calls using the AsyncRestTemplate. Each call will return a future that can be added to the list. After initiating all the calls, the user must wait for all futures to complete. This can be done using the futures class to gather the results. Finally, the user can process the responses as needed. Each response can be accessed from the list of responses gathered from the futures. Fun fact, the term asynchronous comes from the Greek word asynchronous, meaning not at the same time. So when we use AsyncRestTemplate, we're literally working with calls that don't have to wait for each other. Now let's look at the answers provided by other users. An alternative solution involves using Spring's REST template along with Java 8's completable future. This method allows you to send multiple requests asynchronously while managing responses effectively. In this approach, you create a list of completable futures to hold your requests. Each request is executed in a separate thread, and you can chain additional logic to handle responses. Finally, you can wait for all requests to complete using completablefuture.allof, ensuring that your main thread pauses until all operations are finished. Here's that bonus tip I promised. Always handle exceptions for each completable future. This way, you can manage errors gracefully without crashing your application. And there you have it. You can now make multiple API calls using AsyncRestTemplate and wait for all of them to complete. Remember, asynchronous programming can greatly enhance your application's performance. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe for more tips and tricks.